And
Time.
begin. It's time.
Time for a new conversation.
So, we have gotten the question, how are you doing this? And we wanted to kind of answer that today. And further off of that, we got asked the question, you work so hard at something, meaning our degrees and our careers as dentists. How are you willing to walk away from that? And interestingly enough, that question comes not from other people in this sort of profession. It comes from people within the profession and not from people outside of it. And I think that points to a little something that we'll talk about during our conversation today. And another part of the question, another aspect of it is you're in this career that is providing such a certain amount for you financially, providing well financially. How do you have the willingness to just walk away? So that's kind of what we're going to get into and explore today in the conversation. And I think we'll kind of get into it by starting at the beginning. So for me, this started for me way before it started for Miles, this journey down this path, because I think that I always knew that there was something else for me, and this was not it. And I think that came from knowing deep within that there was a fundamental misalignment with what I was doing career-wise and what I knew that my soul really wanted to do. And so I went through dental school and didn't really enjoy what I was doing while I was in dental school. And just pushed through because I thought maybe I just don't like school. I knew I didn't like school. I've never really liked school. And so I thought it would get better after I was no longer in a education environment with the strict rules and confines that you have to fit into and requirements that didn't make sense. There's a big part of my nature that is a little bit rebellious and wants to kind of push against those kind of things. And I thought that maybe getting out of the school environment would help that. And then entered into residency after graduated. Still didn't feel any better. And went into private practice and was thinking that that's when it would feel better, because then I would be more autonomous and not have all the silly rules and constraints of school, and
Actually get compensated.
yeah, and actually fairly get compensated for what you're doing, which honestly wasn't really and has never really been a priority for me. It was more so how do I feel doing what I'm doing, and how fulfilled am I, and do I like going into work? And for me, going into work every day felt like it was draining all of my energy and sucking the soul from my body.
Soul crushing.
Yeah. I really dreaded going into work every day. And if you were in my office with me, you didn't know that. That's, something that I think is trained during professional school is to be a professional and present and do your job in the way that you're trained to do it, and kind of leave the other stuff at the door and do what you need to do, because you are performing procedures all day and things like that, and you can't let that interfere with what you're doing. So there's a certain aspect of that is definitely true. Some of it was also, Miles and I didn't realize this, but that's also an intuitive gifting that I think both of us had, was to understand how to, no matter what was going on for us, make the person who was with us in the chair, whether that be the patient or even our assistants working alongside of us and our staff, feel comfortable and feel confident in our care. So that's a little bit of a tangent, but what I was getting at is that every single day that I would come in, it would feel draining for me, and you wouldn't have known that. And But I knew it, and I felt it, and I was feeling the consequences of it as I felt myself drift further and further down a path that was eventually what I felt going to trap me into a certain career and way of living that wasn't resonant with me and wasn't in alignment. Further and further away from what I knew was my truth, which was something much grander, bigger, more expansive feeling to me, because it was more in alignment with my soul. And so that was something I always knew I needed to do. And Miles, from the time I started expressing that, was really very supportive of it and understanding of it. I think there might have been like an initial whoa, like what is this going to be and what is this going to turn into? But I think you were pretty supportive of that from the beginning.
Well, I witnessed how not happy you were. There was an aspect of you that just was not alive when you were doing dentistry. So it was easy for me as a husband to want to support Caitlin in leaving dentistry. I do remember, though, that the day she had her last day as a dentist, which was the day she started her maternity leave, it was December 3rd, 2021, and I cried that day. And Kate gave me some crap because I didn't even cry at our wedding. And she's like, "Why are you crying today?" And I was like, "Well, it's the end of an era." I knew intuitively.
I was so ready for it to be the end of that era.
It was the end of an era.
Miles was not.
Well, she was my orientation leader. She taught me how to drill a tooth, right? So she was always a year ahead of me in dentistry. So when she left, it was now actually a new aspect of me. There was always a security and comfort and safety in the fact that my wife had walked this path before me. Mm-hmm. So there was an aspect of like, hey, you have new responsibility now. Not only is your wife not working and making any money, but now you're also on a new island as a dentist. You're leading. Mm-hmm. It's time for you to lead this family.
Yeah, you're in the lead.
So there was an aspect of me needing to step into that. Mm-hmm. So I was very supportive of her leaving. I wanted her to be happier, but I was resistant to leaving myself, even though we were both feeling and hearing the call to more. Kate was more receptive and accepting of it, but I was very resistant of that.
Yeah. And so way before my maternity leave, I was starting to explore options of what else can I do, what's better suited to me, and went down the route of health coaching and like got a few certifications with nutrition. Started doing that and then realized that it was lacking the depth that I knew that I wanted to be in with people. And so then it was kind of like back to the drawing board after that. And that was when Miles and I went to Sedona for the first time. And we had done some really pretty epic trips prior to this trip. We went to the middle of the rainforest in Costa Rica. We did not go to the beach. We went into the middle of the rainforest in Costa Rica. That was a big adventure.
Deep in the jungle.
That was for our honeymoon, yep. And that was amazing.
River rafting, the whole nine was amazing.
Yeah, it was a big adventure for Miles, who had really only gone to the same like 3 resorts his whole life, basically doing the same routine over and over again.
You could argue that it was the most expansive week of my life at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Miles planned all of it, so it definitely opened a door for us in terms of adventure. And then our next big trip together after that was going to Banff and Jasper.
Well, we did technically go to Alaska, but that was on a cruise with family, so not quite as lit up. But then it was the week in Banff and Jasper, which was extraordinary.
And that was amazing, and that opened up a lot of doors for us as well, because the way that we went about that trip is we booked our flights, we booked our stays, but we did not plan out what we were doing each day that we were there. We really kind of planned it out like the day before.
It was based on what felt right in the moment.
Yeah, like we planned out our first 2 days while we were on the flight into Calgary.
Yep.
And it was really just us being open to adventure and kind of seeing where we wanted to go and letting ourselves be guided. And we did just that. We let ourselves be guided. We let people that we met along the way guide us. We kind of let like inspiration and the flow lead us on that trip. And it was it was really an amazing trip.
And
Very
I don't
expansive.
I don't think we had ever felt so alive before, but we had been priming ourselves for that moment because we had both started to really step into the inner work journey at this point. It was in 2019 when we went. So we had a different awareness for that trip than any other trip prior, which allowed us to be more in the moment. But then it also made us realize just how much of that we didn't have in our day-to-day life when we came back.
Yeah.
And we were like, holy cow,
Yeah.
something's really incongruent
Yeah.
with the way we
Like,
just lived versus the way that we
that
are
level
living.
of like just divine inspiration that you get from being in that kind of immersion in nature. There is no way to describe the like grandiosity of the landscape in Banff and Jasper. Like, it is, you have to see it to believe it, you have to feel it to believe it. And from being immersed in that and feeling that every day, I think we realized, like, we came back to New Jersey and we said, like, where are we? What is this?
Well,
And-
not only were we in gorgeous, the gorgeous Canadian Rockies, but we also spent so much quality time together because there was a lot of driving. And some of our best conversations happen when we're driving.
Yeah.
So we had all these really inspirational talks while seeing these inspirational sights,
Yeah.
mountains all around us, the most crystal blue water you've ever seen, like the most like fluorescent blue water you've ever seen. It was a very awe-inspiring week, and it fueled us to want to have more of that in our life.
And I think that unlocked a big piece of the puzzle for us in terms of what we knew we wanted to build in the future, which was that we needed to be in an environment that was awe-inspiring, that we felt deeply connected to the land, like a very sacred connection to the land, a deep resonance with it, and something that gave us that sense of wonder and also allowed us to explore and be outside and
We were 29
have a
at the
sense of
time.
adventure.
We were 29 at the time, and then we turned 30 during COVID. And it was at that time that we were supposed to go on a trip to Arizona. We were like, hey, this is going to be our next big adventure.
We were going to road trip all around
We were going to
Arizona.
do Grand Canyon, we were going to do Sedona, we were going to do Page, Arizona, so we could see the Horseshoe Bend, we were going to do Antelope Canyon, the whole nine. But we ended up having to cancel the trip, and it was actually a blessing because we were only going to spend 2 days in Sedona. So when we had the opportunity to redo it the next year when we were 31,
And this was interesting because when we decided to do it again, we decided to stay in Sedona the whole time because by that point we wanted to have that sacred, very spiritual experience that Sedona held for us, because in that time between 30 and 31 was when we really started tapping into
that was our spiritual awakening.
into our more spiritual side and a connection to something greater. And I think that just fueled our direction and our purpose and where we were going even more. It gave us a sense of, it was almost like a compass and helped us navigate our way
And
to where we wanted to go.
what's important with this, though, is we had some awe-inspiring trips, and it fueled more further desire for those types of things to be part of our life in the future. So we continued to travel to want to create more of that, rather than some people, you kind of stop at that one moment. It's like, oh, that was really cool, but I don't think I could do that again. So we had the willingness to keep going, and we went. And then when we first saw the Red Rocks the first time, Kate just like started laughing. She was like, "Oh my God!" Like
Yeah.
it
I
was
was
just
like,
a
"Is this
long.
real?
it
Like,
was
this
it
isn't
was
real.
Like we're
You can't be
driving on the road,
serious,
and we're
you
like, "This
know?"
is what we're looking at."
Because when you drive into Sedona, one of the ways that you drive in, the way that we drove in the very first time,
From West Sedona, yeah.
you're coming in on a long desert highway, and it's all just like, cactuses, and it's pretty like monotone beige. And then all of a sudden you start you like see these red rocks in the distance, and you're like, oh my God, there it is. Like we're getting close. And you drive up this little steady hill, and you get to the top of the hill, and all of a sudden Thunder Mountain is in front of you.
Bam, right in
And
front of
as you come up over the hill and drive over it, more and more of Thunder Mountain just gets exposed. And it's this like fire red, unbelievably tall, like enormous, beautiful Red Rock Mountain. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. And that moment was so expansive for us because we looked at it and said, this exists? Like, this is not real. There's no way this is real. This exists. Like, this is a place on earth. This is a place in our country. And that week was really so amazing. We just spent the whole time, again, we did it just like we did Banff and Jasper, and we planned out our days the day before. And just kind of like looked in our guidebook, looked on like all trails, went online, and we're just kind of like going with the flow and letting ourselves be inspired and be guided.
We hiked over 100 miles that week, including 12 miles down 3,000 feet of elevation into the mouth of the Grand Canyon.
Yeah. So that was really, it was such a beautiful week, and we felt such a very deep connection to the land there. And when it was time to leave, like I was crying. I didn't want to leave. And said, I don't want to leave. Like, this is where we belong. This is our home. This is our soul home. And as soon as we left, we wanted to plan our next trip back. And that was really like the start of an era. And then we got home, and a few weeks later, found out that I was pregnant. So that was
more of Sedona's magic.
Yeah, that was a big shift. And what allowed me ultimately it gave me the opportunity to, our son gave me the opportunity to have a clean break from dentistry, and it really gave me the easiest out. That's not the best way to say it, but gave me a very clean, easy way to explain to people, like, I'm going on maternity leave. I don't know if I'm coming back. Very easy way to explain to patients, to other people, really like understandable, rather than having to go into the whole thing of like, I don't want to be doing dentistry anymore.
You mean what I've been doing for the last 6 months?
Yeah, I don't want to be doing dentistry anymore, and like basically explaining like why my soul feels called to something different. And yeah, that started a whole era. And when our son was born, we knew I wasn't going back. I didn't want to go back because I knew that I didn't want to be back in a career that didn't feel good to me. But that started a journey of going into the void, which we talked about already in depth, of trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do. And because I had never really been able to figure that out for myself, I was kind of told what that should be and directed as to what that should be my whole life.
It's important for context for people to understand like where I was in this though. Like, Kate knew basically since the day she got to dental school that she didn't like dentistry. Whereas for me, it was like, hey, this is my life path. My dad's a dentist. I'm going to work with the family. That was my dream, right? That was as far as I could see, was that I would be the dentist in the hometown, buy a house, get married, blah, 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 have a family. That was going to be the rest of my life. And when I had achieved those things at 28, it didn't feel fulfilling. But I didn't have any other reference point to turn to anything other than, well, let me just grow the business. And the better the business does, the better our family will be, the more we can go on these awe-inspiring trips. So I was doubling down more on the business. And the more I doubled down on the business, the more I was actually away from my family. And the business was growing. We tripled it in 4 years. And it was hitting extraordinary heights, yet I was more and more not present at home. And then when we had our son, I had to step into a new level of responsibility in regards to providing for the family without Kate making the salary she was making, and also with just being there, right? I wanted to help the business, help the family, blah, 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 but I wasn't taking care of myself at all in regards to nourishing my spirit or my soul. And I wasn't remembering to help my wife. I was more focused on my son. So the reason this is relevant is in the moment of her turning away and stepping into the void, I was overcompensating and focusing on business more than ever. And it led to a really incongruent life. We were misaligned. And it was a hard truth for me to eventually face and realize that I had been living in a way that was not sustainable for our family. And the only thing that would help us is if I started to be home more often and gave Kate more space, because motherhood wasn't fulfilling her the way that she expected it should based on what society had told us. So I started to work less so she could have some space, but I got more productive at work, so our income didn't take a hit. We were still rooted in stability and in security. Oh, well, we're still making enough, so we're okay. But it wasn't until I was willing to walk away from the security of what dentistry provided where I was finally willing to say, hey, I'm open to moving somewhere else. Where Kate had basically waited for me for years with this underlying level of, maybe there was some resentment, but also general dissatisfaction with, she knew the truth. And I was trying to find every compromise in the book to help her and I live the truth that we knew we experienced on those trips to the Canadian Rockies and Costa Rica and to Sedona, while staying rooted in the security of what dentistry provided for me, because I couldn't see beyond it.
It was like, I feel like my design is very much that when something isn't in alignment and it's uncomfortable for me, it like screams and it's hard for me to stay in it. Miles is much more willing to just kind of like,
grind it out.
Chop wood, carry water, like just keep going. And when we had those really expansive trips and really started doing this deep like personal development and spiritual journey, I knew that there was a calling for something more, and I knew that there was something more for us. But I think that what we were trying to do was figure out how we could do that within the context of both of us working in dentistry. And then when I finally came around to the fact that like I need to get out of dentistry, it was how can we still do that within the context of Miles owning and being an owner in this business and continuing in dentistry in that way. And so we were really trying to fit our lives around this career because it was something that we felt like we should do. And
well, it's something we committed to, right? We put a lot of resources and time into it. So we said, well, we weren't willing to call it a sunk cost. We were willing to try and mold it to what our needs were.
I think that was more of your
okay, yes, me
mindset. Me. My mindset has always been, I know that I invested a lot of time and effort into this career, but if this is not fulfilling to me and it is draining the life out of me, it's not worth it. Like, no amount of time or money is worth it to me. I mean, this isn't a dress rehearsal, right? Like, we're here once. Like, I'm not practicing life, like I'm living my life. And so I knew that it was either just swallow it and take it and move on and find something better, more aligned and be happier, or live my life in disappointment.
It would be mediocrity.
And in mediocrity and knowing and wondering what could have been, because knowing that there was another possibility out there for me. And so I was okay with that. I had a lot more tolerance for that. And I think Miles did not. And there were a lot more dynamics at play in his situation too, with a lot of the, like his family being involved in the practice and the business. And there were a lot of ties to that in there as well. Miles is a very, very, very loyal person, almost to a fault, where he will stick with something or a relationship, whatever, even when it's no longer serving him anymore, because of how loyal he is. And that definitely, came into play as a factor in the situation.
It was a value conflict because it was either loyalty to the legacy of the family and the responsibility I felt toward my family and the family business, or it was the loyalty and responsibility to my core family, my wife and my son.
Yourself.
And of course myself.
Yeah.
So when the pain became too great and I realized that the former was no longer actually my responsibility and it really was actually the latter that felt like it was the thing that mattered most to me, that was when the decision started to become more clear.
Yeah. I would say there was a long period of time between when we went to Sedona the first time, and that was kind of like, for me, it was like, we need to move. Like, we can't, I don't want to be living here anymore in this kind of like current iteration of our reality in our life. Like, this is not congruent with us. This isn't it for us. And I knew that was the case. And I was trying to figure out how we could go about changing it, what could be different, what we could do. And I would Miles and I would have conversations about this, but he wasn't there yet. He was still very attached to and bought into and clinging to this idea of him still doing dentistry, because to him that was the only way that he could generate income and basically provide for our family. And so therefore in his mind that was our safety, that was our security, that was kind of our seatbelt, and he wasn't he was stuck on that. And so I kept trying to push and move forward in a direction that I knew was more aligned and more in resonance with our family. And it was like, as I was trying to do that, there's like this weight holding me back that I honestly wasn't even really aware of Miles's, like, his degree of, like, I don't know, inertia in that. Like, I thought he was much more on board with me than he actually was.
Well, because my words would tell her, yeah, we're going to move.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will. But my actual true energy, my, like, true conscious willingness, like, was not there.
Yeah. And it got to a point where Miles would say, okay, we'll own the business from afar. I'll come back, or like I'll come back and, you know, work for 3 months at a time, and then come back to Sedona, and then come back to New Jersey for 3 months and go back to Sedona, or I'll work remotely and just handle like the business.
I'll replace myself. I'll
things.
Replace myself from a provider standpoint.
Would still just had this like tether to the idea and to the office, and
it was an anchor.
It was an anchor, and it was holding us back. And he was trying to figure out how to have his cake and eat it too, like how to give us this life that we knew was much more congruent for us and in alignment and felt so much better and more expansive and alive, but also still have the security and the stability of what he knew, and really the only way that he had known his entire life to provide for a family. From watching, you know, that was the way that his family did it, was through his father providing for his family growing up through solely his dental practice.
Well, I was trying to fuel the life that we desired with the life that we had already created, but you can't support the new with the old. If you're going to step into the new, it requires the aspects of the old to either be let go, released, whatever word you want to use. Now, you're going to take pieces from the old that you've integrated that are going to serve you into the new. But in this case, I was trying to take literally an incarnation of us, and of me especially, to fuel this new life of ours, that there was a very big mismatch. It was never actually going to fit.
Yeah.
And that's why I was at war with myself. And I spent about 6 months negotiating to buy the family business.
Yeah. And it was this inability and unwillingness to release the grip on security and stability. Because
it was all fear.
It was all rooted in fear on Miles's part. I'm much more able to kind of let go and lean into faith. Miles is, you know, not so much. That has shifted and changed. But at that point in time, it was very much rooted in the here and now, and I'm just going with what I've seen before and working from that.
There's differences between masculine, feminine aspects, etc. You know, so the security of me was just like hyper masculine. I was trying to stranglehold and control everything because I had a plan, and I've always had a plan, and I want the plan to go according to plan. So in this case, I was trying to figure out the nuts and bolts so we could have everything that we wanted. And it was never going to match. And it was only in a moment of a true sit down with my father and my brother on October 15th of 2023, where I laid out my vision for owning the business from afar, replacing myself as a provider, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they both looked at me like, no.
Yeah, Miles presented his idea that he had come up with, basically
my compromise.
His compromise, his way of staying rooted in the security of what he knew, but still being able to have somewhat of this life that we desired, but not fully, but kind of like somewhat. So he was trying to have a foot in each world, so to speak, and presented his idea for it to his father and his brother, who were to be, you know, essentially his business partners in the future. And their reactions were...
The reaction was no. It was just no.
Like a flat out no.
And it wasn't anything wrong. There was nothing wrong with them for that reaction.
Yeah.
They're like, we want you to be present. You know, it's
Yeah.
important that you're here.
Yeah, and there was no coming to a compromise. There was no like negotiation of it. It was just a fundamental mismatch of ideas.
My body, the second they said no, I felt it release. All the tension I was holding on to, all the constriction that I had, the conflict that I had, it was gone. It was like, ah. And I just breathed for the first time. I was like, oh, it's very clear. This is the path. We have to leave. We're going to leave then.
Yeah.
And I told them in that moment.
You just needed a little bit of help. I'll just need a little bit of a boost,
I would love to tell you that I was proactive.
To get him there.
I'd love to tell you I was proactive, but I've lived a lot of my life reactively.
He knew what needed to be done, but at that point in time, what it required was for literally a door to be closed and shut off, so that the only decision was obvious. Like it was your only choice.
Simultaneously, while this realization was occurring, I also was starting to come to grips in terms with the fact that I needed to stop looking at my wife to be a savior. I kept thinking and telling her, I literally said to her, I was like, Kate, you're the X factor. Like, you want to get out of here? You want to go somewhere? You start working again with something that's more congruent for you, and the money you make can fuel these other endeavors that we want to have, while the money I make from dentistry will keep us being able to support this lifestyle that we have. And I kept looking at Kate as the solution toward living this life that we kept talking about but never making moves toward. So in this case, It was simultaneous with me saying, I'm going to leave the business, with also my imagination and creativity coming online. Like, oh, actually, I can be the solution. Not that she didn't matter, she couldn't be the solution, but it was like, oh, you can just actually be responsible here and make something of your own. And that's exactly what I did with the men's coaching career. And a week or two after October 15th, I had this like program download out of the universe. And I just wrote down, like I scribbled down a 13-week program, and I ended up running a beta group with my local group of men. And it ended up kick-starting this effort into working myself into a new career. And then in me trying to step into this new career, it has presented Kate with more time and space. And now she's coming to a point where she's actually going to be very much providing probably even more than me in the future. You know, we're going to be shifting how we're generating for this family.
But it all began, and fundamentally, you know, the question of how are we doing what we're doing? How are you okay with leaving a career that you invested so much into? And how are you comfortable leaving this, you know, basically source of financial stability? It all comes down to a decision. We made the decision to do so, and the way forward, the path has been shown to us as we move forward. Also, it's like doors get open, new levels get unlocked when you make the decision, when you make the choice. A lot of your personal power comes from choice. A lot of time, like when you don't feel like you have personal power, or when you're feeling like there is no personal power behind what you're doing, oftentimes it's when you're looking at a situation and seeing it as though you have no choice. But really there is a choice. There's always a choice. And so for us, the way forward got shown and started to open up the moment that the decision was made, that the choice was made. It all comes down to a decision. And for me, the decision had already been made. I was just waiting for Miles to come on board. And once he had that conversation with his father and his brother, the decision was made.
And I often talk about when one door opens, that's great, but you actually have to walk through the door to be able to tap into all the potentiality and infinite possibility that's on the other side.
That brings up a good point, because, you know, the decision was made, and at that point we kept saying, oh, we're going to move sometime in the next 18 months. But it was like, I was noticing, and I kept bringing this up to Miles, that time would go by and we'd go, 2-3 months, another 2-3 months, and it would still be 18 months. It was like the carrot dangling out in front of us that never was actually getting any closer. And so that was the point where I was like, okay, we actually need to start like making moves to make this happen, because we can't just put a timeline on something and then just hope that it magically happens on its own. Like, there's things that need to happen in order to bring us closer to this. Like, if we say 18 months now, 6 months from now, it should be 12 months. But instead, like, the ball just kept getting kicked down the road.
But there was still fear.
Yeah,
it was an arbitrary timeline, still rooted in fear, even though the willingness to make the decision was done, but was there the willingness to take action?
Yeah.
And that was the difference for me, and what I was lacking was faith. I was lacking trust. I was lacking surrender. There were other pieces that I still needed to integrate to be able to say, hey, I'm ending at the office January 30th. We're moving March 12th. It took me a lot of time between October 15th and 2023 to declaring those dates.
Mm-hmm. You know what's interesting is we this summer, this whole year, actually, all of 2024 was a big year for us, and we decided to intentionally make 2024, all the travel that we did in 2024, with the intention of kind of testing out locations for us to move.
There was one question: can we live here?
Yeah. And so in March, we went to Sedona. I had a seminar, a myofascial release seminar in Sedona, middle of March, and that was kind of the tail end of their winter. March is a very like volatile month there, where it could be 60 degrees and beautiful and sunny, and you're walking around a t-shirt one day, and then the next day it's 30 and snowing. So we kind of wanted to make sure, like, hey, can we handle winter in Sedona? We were there for 10 days and no problem. Like, it was fine.
No, it was a breeze.
It was fine. It was still Sedona, so it was fine.
Well, there's one thing that you said that's important I want people to realize, though, is that you were building skills all along the while. So it's just important to note that, like, we're not just arbitrarily moving without any sort of ability to create this new life. So you were building skills, which is important.
But now it was building skills that I'm actually interested in. And some of it might not end up panning out into much of anything in what I do. But it's just the willingness to expose yourself and be willing to be open to learn the things that call you and the things that seem interesting to you. And shortly after we came home in March, we flew to Maui as a family, and we stayed there for another 10 days or so.
Yeah.
And we had heard amazing things about Maui and people absolutely loving it and really being enchanted by it. And
I hated it.
Miles and I, it was like the first day, it was very obvious that it was not the place for us. But Miles and I kind of looked at each other at one point and we're like, this is not it. But we said to each other, let's not talk about how we're feeling yet. I don't want to like influence each other in one way or the other. And let's give it a fair shot, and let's wait a few days until we really discuss and talk about how we're feeling here. A few days later, it was still the same. It was like, this is great, this is awesome, but this is not it for us. Like, we just not right now, at least.
our design, though, is more supported by the mountains. So, like, there was just, when we felt most alive in Maui was when we were in Haleakala.
I just don't think we're tropical people.
not that much.
Not right now, not at this point in time. It didn't feel resonant. Like, as soon as we landed in Sedona, it was like, there was this resonance, you're syncing up with the land. You're like, wow, oh my God. You can't explain it. And it's just this, if you've ever been to a place and it's almost like there's this soul knowing within you that gets activated. That's how we felt in Sedona. And in Maui, it was like, I feel like there's something wrong with me because I feel like I'm supposed to love this, but I don't. What is going on? And we just, at first we started making ourselves wrong for it. And we were like, are we too, like, I don't know, rigid? Like, are we too set in our ways? Are we just, do we just have blinders on and like we're tunnel vision for Sedona? What's wrong with us? And then we just realized, like, there's nothing wrong with us. That's just not us. It's not our design. It's okay.
Our hearts were already in another place. So then we decided.
So after that, we went to Sedona in July. Miles did a 3-week shamanic healing and breathwork facilitation training in Sedona with a mentor that we had met actually through
Prior Sedona trips.
Yeah, commissioning her to do Stellan's birth blessing at our second trip back to Sedona. Third trip.
When he was 9 months old.
Our first trip back there with Stellan. Stellan was 8, almost 9 months old, and she facilitated his birth blessing for us. And so he did this training with her, and our thought was Sedona is the hottest part of the summer. Like Sedona's hottest month is July. That's like the heat of the summer there. It's gets sometimes over 100 degrees.
Well, there's actually an important part of the story. I initially set an arbitrary timeline on, hey, I'm going to go do this training in February.
Oh, yeah.
Because I had February of 25.
25. So initially, the plan was for him to not even have done it yet.
Yes. No, we would be doing it while we're going to be in Portugal, actually. And so the reason I arbitrarily set that timeline is I had a trip that I had booked to go to Wyoming for a week.
I forgot about that.
Back in a different incarnation of myself. And I just didn't feel right about it. And she didn't feel right about it. And I just ended up being like, I think I'm holding off on this training just for some arbitrary reason that I made a commitment.
That trip was really interesting because it was a trip that Miles would be basically backpacking through the wilderness and would have no access to any sort of communication with me and Stellan the whole week.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That he was there, and that really didn't feel good to me.
Yeah.
It almost felt like, why are you trying to force something so extreme that's like so not in alignment? Because you're like trying to push some sort of like
awakening,
growth or awakening or whatever you think is going to be there for you to happen. It felt very forced, and it just didn't feel in alignment. And it was funny because, we were planning around that trip, and then all of a sudden it just dropped in, like, for Miles, why don't I do what would it look like to do the training in July? And initially Miles had shut that possibility off because he thought,
I've already afford taken both and can't take more time off from work.
Both. I've already taken 2 10-day trips. Like, I can't take more time off of work. And so it was just, okay, let's see if this is an option. Let's see how we can make it happen. Let's figure out how to make it happen rather than just cutting it off. Like, let's try. And so Miles came up with a constructive solution. He just proposed the idea to his father and came up with a constructive solution to make up that time at the office that he would be missing. And, my belief is that money is quantum, so the money was there for us to be able to do it.
Well,
figured it out.
Money's certainly been quantum because we've had exactly what we've needed to basically do every single one of these life-changing trips. And going to Sedona for 3 weeks in the dead of July, the dead heat of July, we were like, actually, this is totally fine. Mm-hmm. And the 100 degrees out there felt more life-giving for us than the 85 and 100% humidity in New Jersey. So it was very clear. It was like, oh, we just did 3 weeks in July. Yeah. So we come home the next day. We have all these plans or ideas of, hey, this is what we're going to do. Like, we come home the next day. We're like, I can't do this anymore. And Kate and I both had a decision simultaneously.
Well, let's go back. Because we were in Sedona in July for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. We lived there for 3 weeks, and we said if we can bear the heat in July for 3 weeks, like, we can live here. That was kind of a big concern, was how bad does the heat get? And it was actually such a life-giving trip because Stellan and I went and swam in the creek almost every single day, and he had such a good time.
I wasn't around.
Miles wasn't around. I was parenting
days
by myself, and it was doable, and it felt very easeful, and that was very different than how me solo parenting would feel in New Jersey. Yeah. And we really enjoyed our 3 weeks out there. And then we got home from that trip and got back into our house, and every other trip that we've done before this, we would get back into our house after dealing with the travel and the airport and say, like, oh my gosh, our house is so nice. Like, it feels so good to be home. Always we'd say, our house is so nice. Feels so good to be back home, settle in. And we walked into our house and
felt dead.
It wasn't there. It
felt flat.
Neither one of us felt that. Neither one of us felt like, oh, this is so nice. It wasn't there. And I said something to Miles about it that night, and woke up the next morning and still felt the same, and it just felt very flat. And I think the next day you went to work.
I went to work, yeah.
Yeah, you went to work, and I was home. And I reached out to you in the middle of that day, and I said, I think we need to put the house on the market. I think we need to move. Like, now is the time. Like, it just feels, it feels like we're getting the signal that this is not it anymore. We really, and it's now. Like, the time is now. It's time to start moving on this.
And I actually had the exact same thought without having spoken to her beforehand. I was like, I'm sitting in my chair in my office. I was like, this is not it. We need to move.
Yeah.
So we made a decision to put the house on the market in August. We spent September trying to sell it. We spent October packing it. And it was, that's a whole other story. But we'd spent the entire year pushing the limits with how creative could we be and how quantum could our money be to be able to find these, these aspects that we were looking for in terms of like, how do we actually move? And then all of a sudden selling the house gave us this influx of like, here's your opportunity now to actually move.
Well, we were trying to figure out how can we financially make this move work.
And this is part of the question.
Yeah, this was part of the question, is like, how can we financially make this work? And initially what we were thinking was to keep our house here and like rent this house and then be able to buy a house out there. There was...
Well, rent out there. So we would use anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and we were kind of staying attached again to like keeping a tether, some kind of like...
An anchor.
Yeah, like a string here. And again, it was like, oh, we bought this house when the rates were so low, and we bought this house and now there's so much equity in it. We bought it so much lower. The price of houses around here is so much more now. Like, we won't be able to get into the market at the same place where we got in however many years ago.
The identity of being an owner. Right?
Yeah, we were very attached to the idea of we were homeowners before, and now we need to continue to be homeowners. We can't start renting. We need to be homeowners.
That would be a waste of money.
We had closed off the idea of renting, and we were looking for another way for us to continue owning. And we were really afraid of letting this house go because of the security and the stability that we had placed in it. And all of a sudden, when we realized we need to put the house on the market and we released our attachment to those things, it opened up so many doors for us, because now we realized we have all this money and equity in the house that we'll be getting from the sale of the house, and that is our starting point.
Yeah.
That is what is going to allow us to take this leap and this jump and have the provision to be able to do so, and to feel okay and to feel stable doing that when we have our 3-year-old son with us.
So it was almost like our former selves, like our past life, we were fortunate to have this thing, this house, an asset that created a lot of wealth for us, that we were then able to sell and utilize that as our new runway to actually go live the life that we want. Yeah. So it's a very abundant feeling to realize the amount of gratitude we have for that home, to have actually provided 6+ years of us living in it, places where our son took his first steps and all these memories of it, but at the same time that it was just this ultimate bridge, as I needed to come around to the idea of being able to move, leave the family, leave the business, become a new person, really, and give our family this chance to have a new existence in life. And then here's the house giving us this one final gift.
Yeah.
And it was really very beautiful.
What was interesting too is we recognized so many of our old conditioning and programmings coming through in this process of coming around to selling the house, because we realized that actually when we looked at what our values are, like truly our values and not being influenced by something else, it was not to own a house. What our value was is living somewhere that felt really, really freaking good to us and made us feel alive, and living in an environment that felt alive. And it had nothing to do with our level of ownership in that house or the size of that house or what kind of furniture we had in that house. And when we finally came to that realization, because when we were putting the house on the market, we were very firm and kind of convicted in our decision initially. And then, you know, as you're going through the process of getting the house ready to list and things like that, it was like, are we, your ego steps in. You're like, are we making a mistake? Or is this
Yeah.
the wrong decision? Are we being silly? Like, are we just throwing away
All the
something?
doubt.
Yeah, like all these nagging thoughts like snuck in. And it was when we sat down and we took a look at what are our values, like truly our values as individuals and as a couple and as a family, and realizing that homeownership was nowhere in there, that we were able to say, okay, I release that. That's actually not, this is not a mistake. This is actually right on track with our values and what we truly think is important, not what we've been told is important. Like, we've been told that owning a home is important and continuing to own a home is important, but really for us, what's most important is feeling alive and having the ability to live in a place that makes us feel that way every single day that we walk out the door. And that was just...
Well, if we look at our values, freedom, sacred connection, love, like those are really important values where being in a place like Sedona is going to offer that
Yeah.
in a much deeper way than being here in New Jersey.
Yeah.
And once we had the decision made and actually the home was sold, it was like, oh, we have so much freedom actually, that Kate then had another drop in. Why don't we go explore Portugal?
Yeah, it was, yeah, I forget if it was, no, that was before we actually closed on the house. Did I decide that right?
It was in the process.
Yeah,
We knew
so
that we were selling
we were
it,
under
though.
contract
Yeah.
with the house, and I had gotten, again, all my best drop-ins come in after I have time and space.
Workouts, whatever it is,
Yeah,
walks.
time and space by myself to be able to think, and that's part of my design. And the hermit
Yes,
line, that's my two
hermit
line.
opportunist.
That's my two line coming through. So I had that time and space, and I had it drop in that we had always wanted to go to see the Azores, and part of my lineage is there, and we wanted to go explore. It looks beautiful. We wanted to go see it, and I said to Miles, why don't we go between, you know, when the house is sold and we're about to go to Sedona, because we won't have a mortgage payment and we won't have a rent payment, and I don't know when the next time that's going to be the case is, so why don't we just travel, because we're not doubling up on any payments and there's no better time. And
We realized how much of a perfect match this was, though, for our values.
yeah, and it just dropped right in,
Yeah.
and fit right into the timeline, and we decided, okay, let's go for it, let's do it. And so we have that trip coming up in February, and then Miles had always wanted to do a cross-country road trip. I wasn't like as sold on the idea, and now he's going to be able to have his own cross-country road trip, just him and Scout.
Yeah, just get
driving
take
across
our
the country
dog in the
for a
car.
week.
Yep.
And you know, he's going to meet us in Albuquerque, and Stella and I are
But
going to fly into Albuquerque.
she's been wanting to see New Mexico for years, saying, I think there's something that we need to go explore in New Mexico.
Yeah.
And just never found the opportunity. And now here you go, perfect
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah.
So we're going to explore, and we're going to be on an adventure of experiencing places that we've been feeling called to. We have the fortunate privilege of being able to do that because of decisions we've made, because this is part of us taking the leap. We're
Yeah,
being rewarded by taking the leap.
Us acting also in alignment with what our true values are, our authentic values, and what we really desire out of life too, has opened this door for us. Because had we tried to cling to the values that were programmed into us or conditioned into us or people around us told us we should have, we would still be trying to cling on to this idea of holding on to our home here or buying a home out there right away, and we wouldn't have the same resources and stability that we do now available to go and explore and collect these experiences that are going to contribute to the people that we are going to be. And really, like, our goal with these experiences too is to bring people along the journey and show other people that this is possible for them too. It really just starts with a decision, and the way forward gets shown to you.
This is all happening in the right timing, though, because even though Kate was ready to move 4 years ago, we actually needed different aspects of us to come online and be integrated for us to be able to make this move right now in the most embodied way that we possibly can. And if I watch this video a year from now, I might say, wow, that sucker knew nothing. But But
Stay tuned. We'll see.
we're doing the best we can with what we know right now. And in this case, had we moved 4 years ago, I would have sought to control that experience in a very different way than what we're about to go through in this moment. And it would have not landed the same, I don't feel.
Yeah.
So now we've got this beautiful opportunity of being able to have done all this work in the background. We almost lived in the silence, right? And now we've got this chance to actually be able to shine our light in a more integrated and embodied way because we've been willing to take the leap and actually share with others about what helped us take that leap.
Yeah.
Faith was one of the biggest pieces here, though.
Huge. And I said to Miles last night, I think you develop a very different relationship and level of depth to the relationship with God, spirit, whatever you want to call it, when you actually truly act in faith and like step out into the unknown and take that chance and see what divine provision and divine timing can line up for you. I think it's a completely different level of experience when you're willing to go out on the line and see what gets put in front of you.
We've taken precise action, though, that has created a new level of the amount of synchronicities than ever before in our life. And the right people at the right time have been being introduced to us, different opportunities coming our way, mentorship opportunities. Right. All of these pieces have been falling into place that we never had a plan for. We didn't know the how.
What's interesting is that like none of that came through with planning.
No, that's what I'm saying.
None of that came through with planning. It was not like, I'm going to try to be smart and do this, this, and this, and line this up so that this happens. No, like all of it came into being through just things kind of falling into place as they should, and trusting in the rhythm and the flow of life, and again, divine provision, things to be lined up. Like our mentor became aware of her through our son coming into the world, and we weren't planning on having children for another 3 years.
I'm glad you mentioned her, just solely because she's been a massive influence for us, but paying our mentor was actually an important exercise for me to go through, because Kate had initially approached me about what our mentor costs, and I said absolutely not. Like just a hard no. Like it wasn't even a possibility. Mm-hmm. And then just a few months later, she reapproached, and I had gone through enough of my own experience at that point where the question went from a hard no to a how can we? Mm-hmm. So that creative switch, which we utilized many other times since, was formed in that moment of, well, how can I get creative to figure out how to pay this amount of money for this investment that was bigger than anything else I'd ever invested.
And in that interim, what's funny is that
the investment tripled.
When Miles initially said no, the investment was about a third of what it ended up being once we finally came to the point.
So I cost myself an extra $40,000 just by saying
to full mentorship. Yeah. And, at that point in time, it was a hard no. And then later on when we said yes to this, it was at a time when we were like, I don't know how this is going to work or happen.
Well, we got creative. We took money out of retirement.
And we figured it out, and it worked. And things were always there when we needed them to be. And
it was fine. Our house helped us pay for it.
A lot of trust, a lot of faith, a lot of getting creative, a lot of asking how. Like, how can I make this work? Rather than if you can. It really, really, again, I'll come back to, it starts with the decision, it starts with the choice. You make the decision to do something and things will fall into place to make it happen.
Even our decision to buy our house was a leap of faith back in the day. Mm. When we first bought it, the interest rate was like 5.25%. It's not that different than right now. And people were like, oh, 5.25%, that's horrible. And we had a payment that was $4,500 a month or something like that. And we didn't know how we were going to afford it. And it turned out that had we planned any of it, we wouldn't have had the provision that we have now had we not bought that house at the right time. Yeah. So it was just another leap of faith that has helped contribute to this.
Yeah. If you asked me how it was that we would get to this place, I would never have told you it's the way that we did.
No. And there isn't a formula, but there are important aspects that we can help other people bring awareness to, whether it be what are your values, what are how deep is your trust, where is your faith, what are the things that actually light you up, what type of things make you feel awe-inspired.
Like concepts and like tenets to act by and to go through life by and really lean into. Not
being defined by your career. You ever notice that the first thing you meet someone, oh, hey, what's your name? What do you do for work?
Yeah.
What if you ask someone, what do you do for fun?
Yeah. That was something that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, was that the people who are asking the question of, you invested so much into this career and it's providing so much for you financially, how are you willing to leave it and let it go? I think it's very interesting that the people that are asking that question are the people who are also in
they're also doctors.
Our profession, or medical doctors instead of dentists, and other people are not asking that question. And I want to say this, and it might ruffle some feathers, but when you go this far in your education, you go through high school, you go through college, you go through a doctorate education that is, in the case of dentistry and medical school, it's 4 years after college.
And then some.
And then you're going into a residency, however many years that is for you. What we don't realize as those people, you are some of the most capable, disciplined, organized, intelligent in terms of book smart people in the world, but you also become some of the most conditioned people in the world. Indoctrinated and conditioned, and you abide by a certain set of rules, because guess what got you to where you are now is by following a set of rules and being really, really good at following that set of rules, to the point that now you are the token children in whatever career you chose to do, and you got to where you are right now because you were so good at that.
A lot of people pleasing, a lot of hard work, a lot of grinning and bearing it, sucking it up, grinding it out, just delayed gratification, but also hypercritical. There were aspects of us that were so ingrained within us that we were conditioned to not see the abundance around us.
Yeah, and also not see like how great and special and unique and beautiful we are, because you're, at least in dentistry, and I can't speak for medical school, your work, what your hands are creating is so, and like your ability in that way is so highly and like intricately critiqued that you start to think that anything that you do is not good enough, and you are expected to perform to a certain level of excellence that was almost unattainable. And so you start to question every single thing that you're doing. And there was so much, this should be another conversation that we have, there's so much disentangling and deconditioning that had to take place for us to get to the place where we are now. To like really be able to embrace this kind of a lifestyle where we're just like going with the flow and leaning into trust and not playing by the book and not playing by the rules. And there are so many people in our lives, especially people really close to us, that cannot understand what the frick we are doing.
Oh, we're very upsetting for people around us.
Deeply bothered and triggered by it, and just get to the point where they can't even talk about it. We don't realize that like some of the people with the most potential to enact change and to like really inspire people in this world also end up becoming some of the most conditioned people, because you get kind of filtered into this career that just every step of the way you're getting more and more conditioned to follow by a set of rules and get really, really, really good at following that set of rules until you don't know how to think for yourself anymore, and you're doing what you think you should do and what is the best thing you could do without questioning, is this actually what feels really good for me? And am I doing anything that feels really good for me anymore?
It's a fundamental rewiring of the entire program.
Yeah, this needs to be a whole nother conversation.
It's deconditioning everything you were taught to be and remembering exactly who you were born to be.
Yeah.
And it's an entirely other conversation. But not to mention the indoctrination, but also the amount of financial buy-in you have. So the debt will keep you trapped. The scarcity will keep you trapped.
It puts you into such a potentially disempowering position.
Yes.
With the amount of the financial investment that you put into it and the time investment. And it puts you into a position of like, even at the root of that question that was asked, like, how are you guys doing this with the investment that you put into your careers and the financial stability, like the root of that question is fundamentally very disempowered, and it's coming from a place where this person feels trapped in what they're doing. And you're stuck.
I'm gonna share an important reframe for everybody. One of the most common things I hear my patients, because I had to tell Kate, Kate had the opportunity to tell people, I'm having a baby, I'm out. I've had to tell people I'm walking away from my family business, and they're all looking at me like, what? What are you doing? I'm like, I gotta go to the Red Rocks. We're getting called out west. One of the things that they all say is, but you spent so much time on this. What is more important, that I spent 10 years achieving a dream, 15 years, 20 years, however many you want, and then stayed stuck in that dream for the rest of my life? Or the fact that I just said, all right, I'm willing now to go live for the next 50, 60, 70 years of my life, and not let that 20 years hold me back forever.
Yeah, it's not a rehearsal.
No.
Like, we're not playing for fun, people. This is it.
Cut the bait. It doesn't matter how much time you spent on it. What do you want to do with the rest of your time?
Yeah.
You can't let prior time dictate your future time.
Yeah.
You can't.
Yeah. But honestly, if you think about it, like, every single part of it, there were lessons in it. And there was learning in it. It's just that
it was an expensive lesson.
It was an expensive lesson.
Time,
you want to know why? Because I didn't listen to it the first day of dental school and decide to take that leap and lean into the unknown. And
because you were conditioned to be the top achiever.
You do the best that you can with what you know and what you're capable of at the time. And I was not at a place in that time in my life where I was secure enough in myself or trusting enough in faith to do that.
But we've said it a number of times. You do the best you can at the time. And Kate and I are very good with giving our former selves grace.
Yeah.
Because younger Miles did what younger Miles thought was best. And that's okay.
You know what's funny, though, is like, I think about our position now, and there's so much more on the line now than
there's
there was
so much
back
more
then.
at risk now.
There's so much more on the line back now.
We had a child.
Back then, I would have just dropped out of dental school and like chilled at home with my parents by myself and been like, what am I gonna do with my life? This is so sad. Like, what was me? And now it's like, wow, I have a husband and a child, and we have bills, and we have even if we
load of debt.
Even if we don't own a home, we still got money coming out every month because we have a lot of things that you know
just
are
have to pay to live.
Fixed expenses to live as part of life, and you can't let that keep you trapped, because it's only going to trap you even more as you move forward.
But we're flexing our creative muscle. How creative can we be in creating the abundance that we desire in order to pay for a life that we truly want to live, that's in alignment with who we are?
It's also leaning into trust, like trusting yourself, trusting in something bigger than you, that knows more. And like, if you are being guided and steered in this direction, how much can you trust that there's a reason for that? How much can you lean into that there's a reason you're being directed in the way that you're being directed? And God, what does it look like when you just like release the molds that you've put yourself into, release the box, the constraints, and lean into the pure potential of what could be?
This conversation wouldn't be happening had we not done everything exactly the way we did it. Everything that has happened for us.
I got a big shout out to Stellan Rain for
being the biggest inspiration in our life.
Really being the biggest catalyst for all of this, because his arrival set us on a trajectory towards truth and towards alignment that I don't know.
That was our story. I don't think you have to become a parent to rewrite your life, but that was our impetus to rewrite our life.
He doesn't even know it yet, and he's just like been the biggest guide and catalyst for all this change in our lives.
You get to witness your children. You get to see the way they're living and the way they're experiencing life. And it's like, that's the way we want to experience life.
Yeah.
We want to be able to just see the joy in anything that we possibly can. So the energetics of things are important for us. The energy in the Northeast is not for us. You get on a plane and you're flying to Newark and you're like, wow, this is not right.
Yeah, this is rough.
This is not right. But you fly into somewhere else, it's like, oh, it feels pretty good.
Yeah.
It feels pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, people go on vacation, they come home and they say they feel really good. And people chalk it up to like you don't have all the
'cause-
obligations while you're on vacation, and part of that is true, but maybe part of it is also that that's an environment that lights you up, and that's an environment that supports your body better, and that's an environment that makes you feel alive and connected back into nature, and that's an environment that you need to be in more.
Well,
and maybe just flirt with the question of like how can I do this for myself? Like what would it look like? What would it feel like?
how many of us stay in our hometown because it's where we were born? Because you've created a life where you just never give yourself the option of leaving.
Yeah.
Even just temporarily. That's what most people in the Northeast end up doing.
It's
Well,
all
that's where I was born.
It's familiarity, and it's a level of comfort. Doing something that's unfamiliar can feel scary, but it's not that it actually is scary. It's just unfamiliar. It's just something new. It's uncharted.
This might trigger some people, but I actually think people saying that their family is a value is sometimes an excuse. I've heard a lot of people, oh, well, my family's here. I can't go anywhere. It's like, but are you really listening to your soul? Are you really actually listening to what's truly most important? And it might be. That might be true. I can't say if it's true or not, but I've just heard so many people say where it's just like an automatic no because, well, my family's here. It's like, but why?
Yeah, I mean, I look at that as what's actually most supportive for you. What is truly most supportive for you? Where do you actually feel your best? Is it with your family? Does your family 100% wholeheartedly support you? Or would that change if you started to change and be more in alignment with yourself? Are they really truly supportive of you? And is this environment providing an opportunity for you to grow? And if it is, then great, stay.
Mm-hmm.
This is where you belong. That is what is written for you. Like, if you will know if this is 100% in resonance with you, if that is what you should do. If it's not, you've probably had a nagging curiosity about like, what would this look like? And maybe you're asking us these questions because you're wondering it for yourself too. Honestly, if somebody's asking us these questions, my question back to you would be, why are you asking me this? Because I've got to think that people who don't have some kind of curiosity about it, who don't see a little bit of themselves in it too, you wouldn't be asking that question because this is 100% for you to just stay status quo with what you're doing. Curiosity can point to a lot of interesting things in your life too.
Yeah. I think you brought up another conversation that we'll have another time is about the importance of being willing for your relationships to change as you grow and to be willing to kind of be okay with the nature of those shifting, because a lot of times it's uncomfortable when we grow for others in the mirror that can be for them, and then you don't want to sit in the discomfort of them being uncomfortable, so you just oftentimes keep yourself small and the way that they are comfortable relating to you, and I think that's an important conversation.
We have family, we have family who literally cannot handle the degree of faith and trust that we're putting into this process, and it scares the
we have a lot of
absolute pants off of them, and they just can't handle not having that safety and security, and it affects their relationship, and it's just like, okay, noted, like, cool.
But if we were doing things for approval, then we wouldn't be moving. If we were looking for external validation and approval and for permission, then we wouldn't be doing this.
And again, we've moved beyond that at this point, which is why we're at the point of now moving into this next timeline of living in the place that feels best and most in alignment for us. A lot of disentangling that had to happen before we got there, a lot of deconditioning, a lot of realizing and unpacking what's mine and what's not mine. So much has gone into this process, so much growth, so much evolution, so much beyond growth and evolution. There's also, it's interesting, it's like growth and evolution in this way moving forward, but then there's also a return to self backwards in this direction too. You're really moving in both directions at once because you're returning to who you truly are, your authentic self that you were born as, and then little by little kind of drifted further and further away from, and reestablishing that connection and tapping back into that.
Well, the more armor we put on, the more masks we wear, the more disconnected from the self we become. So
Yeah.
in this case, we've been taking those masks off and rediscovering who we actually are. And now we feel like we're playing with house money because who knows what's possible from being created from this state, being created from a place of true actual alignment, which we're still not even there yet. We're still living in a less than ideal environment. So, in 3 months from now, these conversations will also still be even further expanded and elevated. And that's what
Yeah.
we've been doing is we've been on a journey of expansion, both back to the self and toward others. And I believe that we'll end up be helping other people with their own expansion. I think
Yeah.
that's part of the story.
Yeah. I think that this is a good place to stop.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll continue with more conversations.
Thanks for
next
listening.
time.